Ever heard anybody say I have black friends, so I can't be racist?
I have a lot of African-American friends.
You might remember that. Former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam tying himself up in knots, explaining how a photo of a person in blackface standing next to another in a KKK getup, including pointy hood, was discovered in his old college photos.
I went to school with, played ball with, and I suspect I've had as much exposure to people of color as anybody.
It seems to be part of the white racial script to default to this notion of having black friends.
So you think you have black friends, but do you really? In Blackland.
And now,
as a brown person, you just feel so invisible.
That's not tradition. Where we're from.
Brothers and sisters, I welcome you to this joyful day.
We celebrate freedom. Where we are.
Get on the ground!
I know someone heard something.
And where we're going.
We the people means all the people.
The Black Information Network presents Blackland with your host, Vanessa Tyler.
The phrase we've all heard before, but I have black friends, makes Professor Timothy Lewis cringe because there is so much more behind that statement, which he explores in his A Celebration of Black Research. Here to break down his findings is the first black professor to receive tenure in the political science department at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, Dr. Timothy Lewis. Dr. Lewis, welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
First, talk a little about your research. What did you find?
If I can back up a little bit and can I tell you what sparked this research?
Yes.
So during what some people have termed, the racial awakening, the protests in 2020 following the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, I was asked to be on several panels. I was doing panels and conversations and keynotes weekly, basically. And it was during this time that I really had upfront conversations, particularly with white people, about how society's institutions, its cultures, its structures really oppress Black people. And it was in these conversations that a particular quote from Dr. King just kept coming to my mind about the need for a re-education that white people, by their privilege, tend to only know whiteness, white culture, white norms. And I landed on the phrase, I have Black friends, because whenever a white person is accused of racism or racial ignorance, they default to that phrase, I have Black friends.
So it's like Black proximity as a defense.
That's how they assert it. And it happens in a host of ways, and it happens despite, the achievement of the person. And in my research, I began with this story of a waitress named Tabitha Duncan, who went viral back in 2018. And her immediate response was, I didn't mean it. I have Black friends. But we also saw in the height of the presidential election this year during the Republican primary, when Nikki Haley could not confirm that slavery was actually the cause of the Civil War, she defaulted to the phrase, of course I knew that. And she said, follow that up with, I have Black friends.
I had Black friends growing up. It is a very talked about thing. We have a big history in South Carolina. So
no matter the level of achievement or pathway in life, it seems to be part of the white racial script to default to this notion of having Black friends.
So in your research, in your belief, we basically in America have race all wrong, and that we should be re-educated. America should be re-educated about race. But whose responsibility is it to re-educate about race?
It's not Black people's responsibility to educate white people about white systems. Black oppression exists because of white institutions, structures, systems, cultures, and norms. And it isn't Black people's responsibility to alleviate their own oppression. That responsibility falls upon the creators of the systems and the institutions, which are white people.
Now that President-elect Trump has vowed and promises to kind of excuse the phrase, blow up all the institutions. So then from that, maybe it is a good thing for us. Maybe these institutions, with its institutionalized racism, should be blown up.
Maybe this just sounds cynical, but I do not trust that even if they would dismantle some of these systems, institutions, that they will replace them with more equitable ones. When we look at history and we look at the creation of various institutions in America, whether we're talking about education, healthcare, or law enforcement, every institution was created either to regulate or control people of color, or it was created without people of color at the table. That has been a consistent pattern throughout history, and I do not believe that that pattern would be changed or upended, particularly in the Trump administration.
How did DEI become such a dirty phrase and so hated? How did that happen?
Well, diversity, equity, inclusion is not a new concept as many people may think. The phrase DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion as a buzzword is only about 4 or 5 years old, but the concepts go all the way back to the civil rights movement. The notion that there needs to be a greater presence of people of color, of different people, different backgrounds. Those people need to be included. And then those people, once included, need to be treated in a way that is fair and equitable, and in some ways compensates for the hurt and harm that they've experienced at no fault of their own. So that those concepts, those core principles are not new. They became to be a dirty word and associated with words like woke and things as really political strategies. There is a fear that because America is becoming more colored, particularly the increases in Latino or Latinx populations, the increases in Black populations, the increase in Asian American populations, while simultaneously there are population decreases among white Americans, that as these demographics grow statistically, that will siphon power away from white Americans. It's something called the white replacement theory, or the great replacement theory, as some scholars call it.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
DEI was a political strategy in a way to prevent that from happening by making diversity, equity, inclusion bad things, dirty words. That was a political ploy as an attempt to nullify or mitigate this shift in population that was observed, which a lot of people associated with a shift in political power.
We won the popular vote by records, so nobody can say that anymore about us. Nobody can say that.
Yet he wins a trifecta, the White House, the House, and the Senate. How did this even happen?
But as a political scientist, this election was frustrating, not necessarily because of the outcome, because the outcome was predictable. It was frustrating because the narratives that you heard from the media were somewhat toned down to both historical and statistical fact. So President Trump did not really make gains among minorities. It was a statistical tie between what he got from Black men in this election and what he got in past elections. He made minimum gains among Latino or Latinx citizens. It wasn't the narrative that you hear from the media. That is a fact that the media is overlooking. And that is that the most consistent predictor of voting behavior is race. Since the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that is 60 years ago, the Democratic candidate has never received a majority of the white vote in no presidential election. Even with the efficacy of the Obama presidency election in 2008, he still did not get more than 50% of the white vote.
For when we have faced down impossible odds, when we've been told we're not ready, or that we shouldn't try, or that we can't, generations of Americans have responded with a simple creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
So what that informs us is that technically white Americans, no matter the state of the economy, the moral aptitude, or as we saw in this election, the criminal record of the candidate, they are going to vote Republican. And in this particular election, the turnout was just higher. It wasn't that President Trump was able to dismantle a Democrat coalition or even increase substantially his numbers of racially minoritized people. It was simply that the status quo stayed, and that status quo was that white Americans turn out to the polls. What we will see once all votes are counted is that it was not the landslide, again, that the media has framed it to be. We will see pretty consistent outcomes as we've seen for most presidential elections.
You mentioned a documentary. Would you talk a little bit about that? And what were some of the answers when you went out and talked to Black people?
The documentary, again, is titled, Do You Know You Have Black Friends? And it's a direct question towards white Americans who will affirm Black proximity as a way to exonerate themselves of racism or racial ignorance. And there were several things that I found, I guess you should call them big takeaways in composing this documentary. One, that when white people affirm that they have Black friends, they are only associating Blackness with dark skin, rounded nasal cavity or certain texture of hair. They're only associating Blackness with what they see visibly. They likely have no relative consciousness of the experiences that Black people face every day. And they don't want to know those experiences, because if they can affirm that their Black quote unquote friend is experiencing an oppressive existence, and they deem this person actually as a friend, they are morally obligated by their concept of friend to do something for this person. But if they remain ignorant, and then they're exonerating themselves from ever having to do anything to change the system or change the experiences of that Black friend. But also I learned that a lot of the Black stories are not being told. In this documentary, you will hear from individuals who are legacies of the Rosewood Massacre. You will hear from individuals who were part of the movement for racial integration in the United States, and how for some they were resilient enough to fight, and for how others it totally changed their life trajectory, never even completing a college degree, even when they had the opportunity to do so. You will hear about the residual effects of racism.
Hear from those alive today how they had to deal with it back then.
You just stayed in your place. You just was Black, and the white folks did what they wanted to do.
They feel that they are just outwardly superior to you.
That was just how it was. You knew you can't do this because you're Black.
Every one of them living long lives, but not short memories of racism. How many whites were cruel, mean, disrespectful. The impact will never go away.
How that racism not only affects the person when the incident occurs, but it affects that person for years to come. And it affects how they parent, how they interact in the workplace, how they show up in their religious institutions. You're going to hear about race and racism in an unfiltered way that you probably haven't heard before. And I am excited to share it with the world.
It sounds very exciting, but I'm wondering if that's what we talk about when we talk about from slavery, the effects we all feel still to this day.
It is undeniable that slavery and Jim Crow still have effects today. One, we need to realize that slavery and Jim Crow was not that long ago. In one of my political science classes, I always ask them, how long ago was slavery? And I always term it in terms of generations. How many generations do we have to go back to get back to slavery? And I say, is it like 4 great grandparents, or is it so many? And there's always this high number. And I always use myself as an example. I was born in 1985. I am 8 of 9 children born to the union of Perry Lewis and Irma Lewis. My mother, Irma Lewis, was born in 1945. Her father, not great-grandfather, which makes him my grandfather, only grand, not any greats, was born in 1896. And his oldest brother was a slave. When you think about it in that context, that means I am literally 1 generation removed from slavery, and that my parents grew up in the legacy and the realities of Jim Crow in the Jim Crow South. So it wasn't that long ago. We're not talking about something that happened hundreds of years ago. There are about 8 million African Americans alive today who survived the horrors of Jim Crow. So this isn't something that's that long ago. So those effects are still there, because it really wasn't anything that's far off in the past.
Dr. Lewis says there are some blacks who have had enough of this talk about race. It's in the past. In fact, they'd rather not even discuss it in today's America.
There is a reality that is just true for Black Americans, but for all racial minorities. Can get close enough to whiteness, then I can alleviate the oppression that I experience as a person of color. This was very heavily present at the turn of the century, when you had Black Americans who were of lighter pigmentation, and they did something called passing. Because they had lighter skin tone and not as pronounced features, they would try to pass as white. The psychology behind that is that if I can get close enough in proximity to whiteness, then I improve my existence. And that is the same through various studies. That is the same mindset of Black people who, to some degree, want to abandon Black affiliation for white affiliation. The notion is, if I can get close enough to this identity, close enough to this experience of privilege, then I don't face the oppression that Black people are assigned to face in a racialized society.
So they're just as much to blame as their friends.
Yes, just as much at fault, because by them not affirming their Blackness, they are validating the moral corruptness that exists under a white oppressive racialized system.
So what are we to do? What's the answer? What are Black people to do? Those of us who understand, live with it, deal with it, and willing to acknowledge it.
Well, one, we have to be courageous enough to call it out wherever it exists. One of my favorite historical pieces is Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. And many people cite Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail, and they use it in philosophy courses and courses on political theory, history, and even sociology. But few people know why that letter was written. You see, when Dr. King was incarcerated in Birmingham for protesting without a permit, many of his evangelical peers and pastors wrote an op-ed condemning him for breaking the law. Of course, under the Judeo-Christian principles, you are to obey the laws of the land. And so Dr. King's letter is a direct response to his peers condemning him. And what he does is he takes a courageous stand by saying, I indeed consciously broke the law, but I did so to call out an oppressive system. And even in this moment, I'm going to call out my peers and colleagues for hiding behind perverted notions of Christianity in order that sustain oppression. So what we have to do is we have to have the courage to call it out wherever it is. Something I always tell my students is that racism is prevalent in places that is comfortable. And by calling it out, we make it an uncomfortable space. So that's something that Black people should always do and always have the courage to do, is to call out oppression, call out a marginalization, and call out outright racism wherever it exists.
To make the good trouble.
Yes, good trouble.
That's right. Talk about the upcoming Evening of Scholars. What is that about?
So we live in a time where there are constant efforts to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are states that are in school districts and school boards that are banning the teaching of African American history and culture and literature. We're having some of our greatest writers like Toni Morrison being removed from library shelves. And that needs to be if I can dip into the culture for a minute, it needs to be a clapback. There needs to be something that says Blackness and its full cultural proudness needs to be celebrated. It needs to be observed. It needs to be acknowledged. So this evening is literally entitled Black, and it's a celebration of Black research. We have some nationally renowned researchers at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and some of their research will be profiled. And at that event, there will also be the screening or the premiere of the documentary. And we will have a Black band. There will be Black speakers. We're going to have an evening that claps back and shows that Blackness, not only as an area of cultural study, but as a legitimate academic discipline that confers upon students transferable skills that they can use in the real world, deserves its place, and it's here to stay.
Dr. Lewis, how can we learn more?
Well, you can visit the SIUE website under the political science page. There's a full page and description of the event. There's a link on how to RSVP for the event. The event is free and open to the public. And come out and join us. I can guarantee you it will be an evening that confirms and that legitimizes the legacy of Blackness. The legacy of Blackness sometimes is overshadowed by the oppression that we face, and we do face oppression. But this evening is about triumph and about how we have affirmed ourselves, even in oppressive institutions like higher education. And we're going to celebrate that on that evening.
And the date?
The date is February the 19th. It will be on the campus of Southern Illinois University. It will start at 6 in the evening.
Dr. Timothy Lewis from SIUE, Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. What an assignment you have, breaking down race in the troubled history of America. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Like and subscribe Blackland. Let me know what you think at Vanessa Tyler 1 on Instagram. Remember, a new episode drops every Friday.